Hey guys, this is the second episode of the Mad Addicts podcast, and in this episode, I want to talk about the importance of fundamentals. It's really the core of what I teach here at Maddox. I try to make sure that all my students understand the importance of fundamentals, and there's one thing to say fundamentals and one thing to explain what it is. And I think that helps a lot because I think people would agree that fundamentals is important, but if you ask them to define what the fundamentals is, it can always be kind of like different things. And I kind of want to talk about what I view fundamentals to be. And I think that if you do have a strong understanding of fundamentals, that jiu-jitsu comes a lot easier, because memorizing technique and then trying to apply it on somebody who can act a million different ways is not a good way to get good at jiu-jitsu. But just understanding it from a conceptual level kind of would allow you to dissect it more, in my opinion. So that's kind of what I want to talk about, and I'm going to be breaking it down into three things. So I'm going to break it down into positions, subjects, and concepts. And to start off with positions, there's umbrellas. I would say 4 umbrellas, and it's guard, side control, mount, and back control. And these positions or when you're on the ground. Of course, there's a stand-up component, but when you're on the ground, there's these 4 umbrellas, and each of those umbrellas have their own variations. So, like, there may be, like, side control, for example, would have Kesa, reverse Kesa, knee on belly, and other positions may have their own variations as well. But it's important to kind of put it all into umbrellas so that we don't kind of categorize every position as its own kind of thing. They fall under a bigger category, which is guard, side control, mount, and back control. So, it's important to mention before I leave this that each position, there is a person who is on bottom, and then there's a person who is on top. So depending on the position, if you're on side control, you can be on the bottom escaping. If you are on top, you're attacking or transitioning. And in the guard, you're either passing or if you're on top, or if you're the person on bottom, you can sweep or submit. But there's always a top or bottom. And so then we can move on to the subjects. So the subjects, and in no chronological order, is takedowns, passing, sweeping, escaping, transitions, and submissions. That's the way I like to look at it. That's the way I like to break it down, simple, to kind of understand, like, okay, these are the things that I'm trying to do. But each of these subjects really has its own understanding that's important before you can even start tying them into the other subjects. And so, takedowns, pretty much all matches start on your feet. So the act of taking somebody down is removing their base from them and putting them on the ground. So that would be takedowns. If we move on to passing and sweeps, if we can put those two subjects and talk about them quickly, there is a person on top or bottom in the guard position. And of all the positions, that position is neutral. So nobody's really winning or losing. But the person on bottom has the ability to sweep, which means pretty much flip the script. They become the person on top, and then the other person becomes the person on bottom. But in order for the sweep to be successful, the person who swept has to have a base. So you go from being on your back to sweeping the person and coming up on top and creating a base, and that would be the act of sweeping. On the other side, the person is trying to get rid of your legs, pretty much. So they're trying to find a way to take your legs out of the equation, because your legs can be used for distance managing. You can use your legs to hook the person into you and bring them close. You can use your legs to submit. You can use your legs to sweep. So the person on top is engaging in the subject of passing. So when you remove the legs and you go to one of those dominant positions, side control, mount, or back control, then you've engaged in passing, but you have to hold the position. And so if we move on to the next one, is transitions. Transitions is going from one strong position to another. So for example, side control to mount, or mount to side control, or maybe mount to back control. Any of these transitions from one strong position to another will fall under the subject of transition. It's not to be confused with passing, though. So if you're inside of somebody's guard and you pass to side control, you didn't transition from guard to side control, because guard was never a dominant position. It was a neutral position. So you can only pass a guard. Same thing for the person inside, like the guard. Like, you can't escape the guard. You have to pass. I hear a lot of people say escape, and I think that it's important, because if you think that you're escaping guard, you're definitely training your mind to look at it a certain way that I don't think is very helpful. So you got to look at it as you're passing, like you're initiating, and so yeah, so then there is the submissions, of course. That's how you end the match. You pretty much pin the person and execute something that makes them give up. So like an armbar or a choke, and then they would have to tap out. So that's what a submission is. It's the ultimate goal of jiu-jitsu, but not an easy thing to do. And you need to be able to be proficient in the other subjects to even get to a submission. And then the last subject that I haven't talked about yet is escapes. And it happens to be my favorite subject because I don't think if you don't know how to escape that you can do jiu-jitsu. Like, it's very tough because once you get put in a bad position, you kind of just have to give up, and escaping is like escaping side control or mount or back control, but it can also be escaping submissions. And in order for us to kind of get back into the game, we have to know how to get out of situations. So it's very important that if we're ever put in a bad situation, that we can prioritize the subject of escaping so that we can then take the lead again and head towards the submission. And I think it's a majority, the majority of the people will do jiu-jitsu really for this idea of self-defense, and escaping is a huge component of that. So if you're put in a bad situation, how are you going to get out of the bad situation in the most efficient way possible? That's what jiu-jitsu is. And so then there's the last thing that I wanted to talk about, which was the concepts. And the concepts really are the glue to it all. I like to think of it as, when I was younger, I was pretty good at math, but I really enjoyed algebra because you can kind of figure it out because you understood. If you put the equal sign in the middle, you can kind of figure out whatever variable you're looking for. And then I didn't like geometry so much. And I think one of the reasons I didn't like geometry was because it kind of, well, at least for me, I felt forced to memorize formulas. So, if you were to memorize a formula, you can just plug in the numbers and get the answer you're looking for. But then you can't retain the formula because you don't really understand the formula. So, I'm pretty sure people can do geometry correctly by understanding the formula. So that way they don't really have to think about the formula or what it is because they just understand it for what it is. They understand why the formula is the way it is. And I look at the concepts as kind of that idea. Like, you understand the whys of the technique. When you're applying the technique, why is it working? Why does it not work? Because that's very informative itself. And so these three concepts that I talk about with my students here is connection, which are only two. There's frames and there's hooks, and I'll get back to that. Timing and weight distribution. So connection, timing, and weight distribution. And they all need each other. So like every single technique, every single aspect of the technique, every single thing that I'm teaching on a daily basis here at Addicts, I'm always talking about these concepts. Not necessarily mentioning them by name, but I'm definitely conveying the technique in a way that cannot be understood if not through the lens of the concepts. So that way we're practicing the same thing pretty much with everything that we do here. So I look at that pretty much as always sharpening that fundamental sword that you have, like this understanding of jiu-jitsu on a basic level. We're always practicing that, and we do it through different forms of techniques. So I think the concepts also help know how to be a proper partner, because when you do a technique, you're not the only one doing the technique. In order for the technique to work, your training partner has to give you the reaction necessary so that that technique feels right. If the uke, who's the training partner, is not giving you the right things to react to, then the technique doesn't work. So like, just imagine a triangle, for example, inside the guard. And then your training partner is just laying down chest to chest and is just being lazy. The triangle, it's not the right time for the triangle. So it would be something else. The timing would be something else. But the training partner, if he wanted to set up a triangle, would have to start resisting against your hooks. Will have to start engaging in the act of posturing up and things like that. So the concepts help you really understand how to do all of this. And then, when you get better, then you can use the concept to kind of guide people in the right direction. Maybe you're with a training partner who's new and he doesn't really know what to do. So when you understand the concepts, you can kind of almost guide them, teach them, be their instructor for a little bit to kind of get the technique done, because you need your training partner's 50% so that you can actually complete this technique. So, you know, if we were to talk about connections are structures that pretty much prevent people from getting away from you or getting closer without using force. And we'll get into that more in a little bit. So there are frames and hooks. Frames are structures that prevent people from getting closer. Hooks are structures that prevent people from getting away. So anything that is acting upon a hook is a pull mechanic, and anything that's acting upon a frame is a push mechanic. So depending on the push or pull will tell you what is available at that time. So that would be the timing of the technique. So if somebody's pushing on my arm, it might be the proper timing to break their posture. If somebody's pulling away on a grip I have on their sleeve, it might be timing to set up a triangle. So in order for timing to exist, connections have to exist. So they're very, very related to each other. And then we have the weight distribution component of everything, which is probably more challenging to understand than the other two concepts, but I think once you get it, you know. But weight distribution is looked at from two sides. So as the person who is on the bottom or on the back and doesn't have a base, and the person who's on top and does have a base. So when somebody has a base, in order for them to progress closer to the submission, they always need to make sure that they're in control of their center, which is their balance. So if they're not in control of their center, then they can no longer do any of the other subjects. They would have to start prioritizing recentering themselves. So it's important that they have their center in order to actually accomplish proper technique. And that being said, the other person who doesn't have a base is actually working the opposite. He's actually trying to off-center his training partner who does have a base, because through off-centering him and that training partner trying to recenter himself, I can set up sweeps, I can set up submissions, I can do a lot. So we're focusing on this idea of balance with every single technique that we do. It gets a little complicated sometimes when two people don't have their base, but I'm sure I'll touch on those ideas in future episodes. So we have those three concepts: connection, timing, and weight distribution. And again, every single thing that I would teach at Addicts is always touching on these subjects. And what I find important as well is so that the students understand better, all the instructors here understand these concepts, and they teach however they teach with their kind of teaching personalities, but we stick true to these core principles of the concepts and the importance of fundamentals, so that way all the students are being told by the leaders the same thing. So if somebody comes in, for example, it's not that somebody might have a different view that doesn't work, but if they come here and they start mixing their views of jiu-jitsu and how they look at it, that can be confusing for somebody who hasn't really started to understand how to understand jiu-jitsu. So I make it an important point to make sure that all the instructors are really focusing on this importance of basics, using the ideas of positions, subjects, and concepts, and applying that as they're teaching with every single thing that they teach. So yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this episode. It was a short one, but I think it was an informative one, and I'm sure we'll talk a whole lot more about these ideas in the future. If you guys have any questions or things that you would want me to talk about, please let me know. You can leave a comment, you can message me, whatever the case, I'd be happy to discuss things jiu-jitsu related. Os.